Yeah, I think a lot of you might have already heard my story, but I'll just explain a little bit about how this collection came to be and how I inherited it. And then I'll talk about the dresses and maybe a little bit about the stories in the book. And then, because the stories in the book I was only allowed to use 200 words or less, a lot of the good juicy bits were cut out, so I can give you the behind-the-scenes version. But my collection came to me in 2004. And it came out of the blue in the sense that my American godmother, with whom I had grown up for the first 20-odd years of my life in America and had been with her as she collected, and she used to take me upstairs to the third floor where she, in her Philadelphia townhouse, where she would have boxes stacked from floor to ceiling and drawers. Every time you would open a drawer, you know, gloves would come springing out because she'd have so many packed in, and you'd slide open these glass mirrored doors in her wardrobes, and you know, you'd see this sort of array, this rainbow of colors of sequins and feathers and every patterned dress you could ever imagine. So I sort of grew up thinking that everybody had a godmother who had so many clothes that, you know, even I, as a sort of 6-year-old or a 10-year-old, could go and try things on. But what happened was, when I left America and moved overseas to work both for art dealers, and then when I ran my own business in France, I kind of lost touch a bit, not with Doris, but with how big and how important her collection had grown. And when I was with her, it was, you know, lovely things that people gave to her, and that's something that's really important about this collection. Every single piece of whether it was a garment or accessory that was given to Dora, it was actually given, and it was given with a story, and hence how these books have come out. But I'll get back to that in a minute. But with the collection, when I was growing up, it was nice, pretty dresses, and you know, lovely, great stories, and Doris would get into it. She was always very theatrical, would dress up in these wonderful garments, even to go down to what was, you know, your IGA, but in America was the 7-Eleven. And, you know, she'd have on some fantastic feather boa, and, you know, in the middle of Philadelphia, which, you know, was not kind of what you wore back in the 70s. So Doris always had this sort of wonderful sort of personality behind her, which, you know, again, I thought everybody kind of dressed up in these wonderful, funky combinations and would go out doing their daily business. Then, when I moved overseas, Doris retired, and when she retired, that was when she really began to concentrate on the collection, and she was invited on some of the huge cruise lines, including the QE2. And when she was on the big lines, these wonderful women would come up to her and say, well, when I had my debut in 1937, I had a Madeleine Vionnet dress made for me. Or someone else, another woman said that she was invited to the White House with her parents when her parents owned the Washington Post, which is a very important newspaper in America. And so she and her sister were sent to Paris, and Dior made all of their dresses, for which they would then go to these White House parties. So it was that second half when she had retired that all these really top designer dresses came into the collection, into Doris's collection. And that, of course, was what I ended up inheriting. And when I was in England, so again, it was probably about 2003, I was visiting a mutual friend in North Devon. And we were sitting there, and I'll never forget that moment. We were sitting in this wonderful big farmhouse kitchen with this long table. And Ruth, the friend, was passing over this huge plate of scones, as you do in rural North Devon. And she said to me, oh, did you hear Doris is thinking of leaving you her collection? And I remember thinking at the time, you know, well, what on earth am I going to do with that? I mean, I just remember that flashing through my mind, because at that time, and I had no idea what I was getting into, and that was just the vague idea of thinking I was inheriting a clothing collection. What do you do with it? And at that time, I was working, I had my own antique shop up in the Blue Mountains. And, you know, just, I didn't know. I wasn't into vintage. I knew nothing about fashion history. I loved dressing up, but it just wasn't something that would even, you know, trigger any interest. So I spent the first, about 6 months trying to figure out who could I give it to, because I didn't know what to do with it. So I actually approached the ABC television network to see if they wanted it for their costume dramas. And then I also approached the National Trust. And luckily, nobody really understood what I had, and no one really kind of was enthusiastic about it. So I thought, well, after seeing a photograph of Doris, which she was wearing this wonderful 60s dress, very, very slender, with this fantastic black marabou collar, and marabou cuffs. And she looked stunning, and I thought, well, if dresses like that are coming over, I might as well accept it and figure out what to do with it, maybe put it in storage for a year, put it in the garage and whatever. Well, I had no idea that 1,200 kilos, 3,500 dresses were on their way to Australia. And of course, when it arrived, I cleared out this big area in my shop. Well, I thought it was a big area. And as the truck pulled up with this enormous great pallets on the back with boxes stacked up high, I was quickly pushing furniture farther and farther closer to the front of the shop to give myself more room. And then they were stacked from floor to ceiling, and I thought, right, well, I'm going to leave them because I'd already been warned the collection was not to come home. So I figured, well, I'll just leave the boxes packed, figure out what to do with it. And then, just like Pandora, you know, you think, oh, I'll just open one. And of course I opened one, and in that box came out this absolutely beautiful cream chiffon dress, which is in one of the stories in this new book. And it was cream chiffon that had these wonderful kind of floaty pattern panels on it. And the beautiful glass beads came all the way down the front. It was just absolutely stunning. So that was the first one I pulled out. I'm thinking, oh, that's nice. You know, thinking, of course, before I unpacked the boxes, that I was getting this huge collection of flowery, pastel-y, you know, polyester, coat, or house dresses. I just had no idea what I was getting. Because, of course, Doris just said, here's my collection, and sort of left me to it. So I thought. So then the next dress I pulled out was a dress that had on the tag, not yet appraised. But it had been worn by this woman called Betsy Harvey, who lived in Newfoundland and Bermuda. And she had worn this dress in 1867 when she was presented to Queen Victoria. So I'm thinking, oh, this is very nice. And it went on and on and on. And of course, you know, when you open one box, you just keep opening. So I opened practically everything, and it took many, many weeks. And I mean, it took me 3 months to actually open every single box and just go through it so that I knew what was in each box. I didn't pull things out of a lot of them. But what kept me going was when we were bringing the collection in, because it had to pass quarantine, and of course, you know, quarantine is very, very strict here. I knew that we were bringing in grizzly bear muffs, and of course grizzly bears are completely illegal. We were bringing in ivory, we were bringing in whole birds of paradise that had been stuffed that would have gone on to Edwardian ladies' hats. So I mean, my 1,200 kilos would have given customs heart attacks, or quarantine heart attacks, and it took them 10 days to go through it. And I know they went through every single thing because, like I said, we had to have every single thing itemized in which box numbered with the box it was in. And then quarantine would stick a little tag on top of the box saying that they'd gone through it. Everything came through, there was no problem, even though it was all illegal, it all came in. They were just checking to make sure there weren't sort of bugs or mites or whatever else they were doing. But the one thing that kept me going, looking through these boxes, was that I think it was item 1017 said, a velvet pouch with jewelry in it. And I'm thinking, right, so of course, it was the third to the last box. There was the purple velvet pouch filled with jewelry. And I have to say it was worth going through finding because, you know, I got diamond brooches. I mean, it's just quite unbelievable. I still think about it and think, you know, it's just unbelievable. And, you know, beautiful mourning jewelry, like Victorian mourning, that wonderful Whitby jet, and lots of the jewelry with the hair that's woven and, you know, sort of the symbol of remembering someone or someone's love. I got fabulous costume jewelry, all designer costume jewelry from, you know, the 50s, and fabulous glass beads, sort of lariat kind of necklaces from the 20s. I mean, it was endless, you know. It really was quite unbelievable. It was 3 months of thinking that you had Christmas every day. It then took me